In this lesson, we will discuss leadership ethics. We need to understand the significance of leadership ethics, and to a certain degree, most of us probably understand the significance of that in a leadership environment. But the fact is that ethics is central to leadership. If you think about many of the previous lessons that we've had, equity theory, expectancy theory, motivation through consequences, when we got into socialization, group processes of cohesion and intergroup conflict. Many of the situations and case studies that we studied or examined really related to leaders making ethical decisions, or very often problems occurred because leaders made decisions that were not particularly ethical. In this lesson, the focus will be on the individual leader. In other words, we're going to look at the leader as an individual, and we're going to examine that from the ethical perspective. In Lesson 31, we're going to focus on the ethical climate in the organization, which certainly requires ethical leaders, but in that lesson we're going to examine the ways that leaders can influence how others behave ethically, or perhaps how they can influence them to behave unethically. But in this lesson we're going to look at simply the leader as an individual in the organization, and examine that individual from the ethical perspective. You see the definition here. Ethics is concerned with the kinds of values and morals an individual or society finds desirable or appropriate. Furthermore, ethics is concerned with the virtuousness of individuals and their motives. So essentially we're going to look at what within the law enforcement organizational perspective are values and morals that are desirable and appropriate, and how leaders can behave in a virtuous manner. We're going to look at what leaders do, and we're going to also look at what leaders are. So we're focused both upon traits and upon behaviors. Now, we need to have a little bit of an understanding about ethical theories, although this isn't a philosophy class. We need to understand that those who examine ethical behavior examine that from two different perspectives. One perspective is teleological, and in these theories, the goodness or the morality or ethics of a given behavior is judged based upon the outcome of that behavior, not necessarily upon the examination of the behavior itself. And that's divided into ethical egoism, and in that we expect people to do what maximizes personal benefit. Utilitarianism is where the greatest good for the greatest number is the outcome. And then finally, altruism, promoting the best interest of others. So we can all obviously act in our own self-interest. We can act so that the greatest good is done for the greatest number of people, or we can simply promote the best interest of others. And this is the range of behaviors, all the way from entirely self-interested to entirely altruistic. And of course, the principal challenge for every leader is, how do I balance self-interest, which is appropriate, against altruism, which is also appropriate. We don't expect leaders to be entirely altruistic, nor do we expect them to be entirely self-interested. We expect them to somehow balance that, but for the most part we expect actually the balance to go a little more towards altruism than towards ethical egoism. Finally, some theorists look at deontological theory, and there we evaluate the outcome, not the outcome rather, but whether the act itself was good. So we both want to look at outcomes, what was the consequence of this behavior, but we also want to evaluate the behavior itself. And virtue we examine as being or becoming a good, worthy human being. So virtue really relates to behaviors, not necessarily to thoughts, although thoughts typically drive behavior. but virtuous behavior over a period of time we know becomes habit forming, and that through virtuous acts we become as individuals more virtuous. We're going to look at the principles of ethical leadership, and this relates principally to behaviors. That the leaders respect other people, that they respect them as humans, respect them as professionals, and especially in our context in a law enforcement organization. That they serve others. That leadership is about service. It's about service to the organization. It's about service to the organization's mission. About service to the people in the organization. There's an entire stream of ethical thought or leadership thought that's called servant-based leadership, in which leaders are examined from the perspective of the extent to which they serve others. And that leaders are just. Again, many of the case studies we've had to this point examined the fairness of processes and outcomes. That leaders are honest, that they tell the truth, and that they act honestly, and that they build community. All of the theories that we examine in Area 2 related to socialization, related to cohesion, related to intergroup conflict, are all really about building a sense of community, a sense of oneness or togetherness in terms of the purpose of the organization. Now we're going to, in our case studies and continually, leaders should ask themselves these questions. How did the focal leader's actions reflect a balance between self-interest and a concern for others? Again, we want to not encourage leaders to be entirely altruistic, nor do we want to encourage them to be entirely self-interest. Again, it should lean a little more towards altruism. But we recognize that there should be some level of balance, and how do leaders balance that? If we think about many of the actions that we've seen leaders take that we thought were unethical or dishonest, if we examine them more closely, we'll very often see that those actions were taken out of self-interest rather than balancing self-interest with the interest of the organization and interest of others. Did the leader's actions violate a duty? And if so, what was that duty? One of the principal challenges that every leader faces is determining exactly what that leader's duty is. In some organizations, it's very clear. Sometimes, though, in some organizations and in some circumstances in organizations, it's not always as clear as we would like it. And one of the roles of a leader is to think about, what is my duty? How do I fulfill that duty? But it's also a role of a leader to help others recognize what their duties are as well, so that they can fulfill those duties. And is the focal leader virtuous? Did the focal leader, or do they respect others? Do they balance self-interest with altruism? Do they serve others? Do they build community? So are the leaders acting in a virtuous manner? And then did that leader adhere to the ethical principles? And if not, which of those principles is missing? So all of this analysis will really be our analytical framework when we go through our leader thought process. We'll develop our areas of interest. We will describe our logical chain of events. Then we'll analyze the situation. Then we will explain what we see in terms of motivation, satisfaction, and performance, and group outcomes from the perspective of what the outcomes were related to a leader's either ethical behavior or perhaps unethical behavior. We'll look for a root cause. And then in the select step, we will determine which of those principles the leader needs to either introduce or approve, and then write a leader action plan for how the leader will actually carry those principles out in some form of virtuous behavior.